In this episode, we have a special guest expert who is going to walk us through the 4 steps she takes when inspecting strata records. Now, this is essential listening if you're thinking about buying an apartment, a villa, a unit, a townhouse, basically anything that has common property.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information. During our 3-year journey to help first home buyers, we have found an increasing number of you want us to help you guide them on your rent vesting journey. So, due to popular demand, we are bringing you the very first Where to Buy workshop Investor Edition.
We are indeed, and this is very exciting for us, I tell you. This is the culmination of over 40 years experience that we're going to teach you step by step, not where you should buy, but
no, this is not the answer. This is not the golden bullet.
Not the silver bullet. It is, we're going to teach you how to properly research this vast, wild country of ours to be able to work out where you should look to investigate to buy your investment property. It's a really, really important skill that you learn how to critically look at data, information, what the important things are, and we're going to teach you how to do it. When are we going to do it?
We're doing it on the, Veronica, I don't have that in front of me.
Well, that's okay. I'll step in because we're a team. And we are going to do the Where to Buy workshop Investor Edition on Wednesday, the 24th of November, 2021, 7 till 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So that's basically Sydney, Melbourne time. 6 till 8 if you're in
Brisbane.
And yep. I can't remember if you're in Adelaide and elsewhere, but basically
about half an hour behind. Yep.
Live to you on Wednesday, 24th of November, we are bringing you the Where to Buy workshop. So if you want to tune in, the link is in the show notes. Today, we're joined by Strata lawyer and fellow podcaster, host of Your Strata Property, Amanda Farmer. And she's going to reveal her 4 steps to a successful Strata records inspection, including what to do when particular records are withheld for privacy or legal reasons. But before we get into that, we have a very special potentially Strata building to have a little bit of a chat about. It's your special house, Megan. And for those watching the video, it's behind her. And this is particularly problematic, I would think, when it comes to defects.
Oh, my goodness. The first thing Amanda saw when I popped it up at the background was, oh, defects. So for those who are not watching, this is the Rollercoaster, called the Rollercoaster apartment complex in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And this was designed in 2010 and apparently was released to the market in 2012. So I don't know. I love a roller coaster, but I don't think that I could live in that property.
Amanda, initial thoughts from your point of view?
I'm not sure that calling an apartment building the roller coaster is a great marketing step. I'm not sure anyone wants to live in the roller coaster or thinks that they're going to be. But I tell you what, from my perspective, so many people do end up living in or on the roller coaster.
It might not look like one, but it might be a roller coaster ride.
Oh, yes. Well, that's why you're here today, Amanda.
Amanda, it is so great to meet you. I know that you've done a lot of work with Veronica in the past, but for you and I, this is our first conversation about strata. When we buy a strata or community title property, it's community title in Queensland, we're buying into what's sometimes referred to, and Veronica loves to call it, the fourth layer of government. And there's a whole additional layer of due diligence that needs to be done, which starts with the inspection of the strata records. You might fall in love with the apartment, but there's a whole lot of stuff that you've got to find out about, isn't there?
There is, and I should say it should start with the inspection of records. It doesn't always start with the inspection of records, but I know that you both recommend to your clients, and no doubt to your listeners, that is absolutely the first thing that you should be doing as a purchaser looking to buy into strata or community title. Have a look at those books and records. But so many people don't. I've done some conveyancing in my time, and 9 times out of 10, the contract would come to me, signed, very excited client. I've just signed this contract to buy a strata apartment. Did you have a look at the books and records? The what? The what, says the client? I didn't know I was supposed to do that.
All right. Let's go back a step. Okay, let's assume that we're talking to people who have not bought apartments before. What are we talking about? What are these buildings and complexes? How are they actually managed, and what is the role of the strata manager?
Yeah, so you described it really well first up. Wherever we have some common property. So we say strata in New South Wales. In Queensland, you say community title. You talk about body corporates. It's strata in WA. We talk about owners corporations in Victoria and also in New South Wales. I've started to use the term apartments, apartment buildings. They may be multi-story. They could be low-rise. We have also community schemes in New South Wales, also now in WA and in Queensland, which are townhouses, villas, quite large-scale communities with lots of facilities. So when you are purchasing into a strata title, I'm going to call them, you are purchasing not land, interestingly, you are purchasing airspace, and you then have a right, together with other owners in the complex, to use the common property, the common spaces, stairs, foyers, pool if you're lucky, gym, and you contribute to the maintenance and the upkeep of those common spaces. Strata buildings are becoming increasingly complex. We have lots and lots more people living in strata and spending a lot more money on purchasing strata and community title properties. So incredibly important that people are going in with their eyes open.
It's not just the complexes though, is it, Amanda? I mean, a strata, a body corporate could actually just be for two. It could be for a duplex.
That is very true. And that is often overlooked. People say, oh, no, it's not strata. It's a duplex. Often it is strata title. You can have 2-lot strata schemes. You can have company title where there are 2 lots, a little bit different to strata, but you still have mutual obligations. And it's very important to be aware of the titling structure when you're buying a townhouse or a villa. Strata can take people by surprise in that situation.
Wow.
Totally can.
So much to learn.
Literally this morning, I was having a sort of a 3-way conversation with client, their lawyer and me about a company title duplex, which is really quite unusual, but in certain areas, that's the way the council requires them to make a subdivision. So complicated and in my view, unnecessary. Well, I don't know why they didn't do a strata. But anyway, that's a totally different topic here. But in terms of those obligations, I agree with you. It's 100% important to understand what they are, but also to understand how you actually get things done. So if you're one of two, you might think it's really simple, but like if you got to insure that building, you got to work out what are the mechanisms that allow you to actually agree on an insurance provider, what the policy is going to be, how much it's going to be, how you pay it. There's, that's really in a way simple. But then right up to those what do you call them? Those complexes where you've got community title tied in, where you've got these shared facilities that might be shared between different strata titles. So different buildings may have a smaller share in each of these bigger facilities, or there might be shops or other sort of commercial premises as part of the strata. So that then takes it to a whole new layer. And if you don't inspect the records, you've got no idea really of the bigger picture here. And so this is, so it goes from quite simple to ridiculously complex. And then you've got strata managers at every level across, well, not always, some of them are self-managed, but strata levels managers that may or may not necessarily understand these complexes any better than you do. And so then how do you then work out whether you're getting access to the right information, whether they can keep records? I mean, it's a nightmare, isn't it? So this is why you're here.
It's a good point, Veronica, because I guess what would be really good to understand from Amanda is what sort of records do strata managers keep? What sort of things are we talking about that people need to be looking at, or have someone who knows what they're looking at look at?
Yes. So records can range from minutes of meetings. That's generally the first thing that people think about. They understand that the body corporate, like a corporation, meets regularly. You have at least an annual general meeting. And if you're looking at the books and records, people usually think, I need to see the minute book. I need to have a look at what has been discussed in meetings, what has been decided. So minutes of meetings absolutely are important.
Can we just dial that back just a touch and
let's do it.
Let people know the body corporate is what? Who makes up the body corporate?
So every owner is a member of the body corporate, also known as the owners corporation. So the minute you have bought into a strata scheme, you are a member of the owners corporation or the body corporate.
So you become one of the body corporate when you own in a complex.
Yeah, part of the owners corporation or part of the body corporate. Yep, absolutely. Right. And you have a say. You have a say in what goes on in the building.
A vote, if you like.
Yes. So when you are going to these meetings, at an annual general meeting or a general meeting, you have the opportunity to vote on motions, to have your say. We can also talk about strata committee meetings or executive committee meetings. This is that smaller group of elected owners, usually, who have been chosen to deal with the day-to-day management of the community. Often they are the ones interacting regularly with the professional strata manager and making decisions about repair and maintenance that needs to go on. We need a plumber who organises that. How do we do that? Yeah. We need to have some direction for the community. Are we going to improve or upgrade the common property? Are we going to change gardeners? Are we going to get a building manager in? The committee is often the group that's making decisions about those things, or at least the preliminary steps towards that decision. Some things need to go before the general meeting legally to have decisions made about them. But when you're looking at records, you will hopefully, I say hopefully because it doesn't always happen, see minutes
Some
of
records
general
are better
meetings.
than others.
Yes, and minutes of committee meetings as well.
Right. Okay. So that's an important one.
Yeah, very. But tell for the basic, back to basics, why is it important for buyers to examine these records?
It's important to know as best you can what you are buying into. And you might say, well, I've gone to look at the property and I know by looking at the plan and then being there physically what it is that I am buying. My apartment, and I've got a car space and I've got a storage cage. It's all great. But when you live in a strata building, and we can start with live, investing is another ball game as well. But when you live in strata, you are very close to your neighbours. You are sharing common areas. You are often hearing what's going on with your neighbours. You're in the lift with them. It's really important in my view, and I live in strata and have invested in strata. So this is firsthand experience. It's important to know the level of harmony within a building. Okay.
Oh, right.
So to me, that's number one.
Golden piece of advice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you have a building where people don't like each other for whatever reason, they're fighting with each other, they're in court or in the tribunal with each other, they argue about whether to spend money or not, they argue about whether to fix a problem in the common property or not, you are going to see, if you inspect the records properly, you are going to see this on the records. And for me as a purchaser, if I see that on the records, that is something that I walk away from,
Ooh.
because it's also the hardest thing to fix. There may be a fixable, maybe the roof is leaking. That's fixable as long as everybody's on board. But personality clashes, and there's one person in particular in the building that just votes everything down or is causing a particular problem. Those kinds of personal issues are very hard to fix. And if you can stay out of those kind of communities, it's for the best.
It's almost like getting to knock on the neighbour's door without actually doing the knocking. But you get a little tiny bit of insight to how people are interacting and different, sometimes you can see feedback or how someone has responded, as you say, to emotion. And if one particular person is always voting things down and they don't want to increase the levies and all those sorts of things, it's a great insight to what potential problems might arise in the future.
That is so true. I never actually thought of it that way. I had an experience recently where I purchased a freestanding home, a house, and not strata. And I haven't done that for a little while. And I actually had that moment where I went, oh, but I don't know about the neighbours. And there was nothing I could do about that. I just had to cross my fingers and hope for the best. There were no records I can go and look at, no minutes of meetings I could look at, no emails I could read. I just had to hope that I was going to get good neighbours. And I recognize that in myself now, that reluctance to jump in. And that is, I think, a benefit of apartment living, that you can get all of this information if you know where to look for it before you sign that contract.
Yeah, one of the things that and we're going to get you to take us through your 4 steps in a moment, but I know one of the things from listening to you many times, speaking to you, that you say, find the email correspondence. And see, the way in which most people get access to these records when they're buying a property, assuming they do get access, as you mentioned before, a lot of people go ahead not realising they can do this or should do this, is that they read a Strata report. Now, that Strata report could have been compiled by the agent, may have commissioned it as part of the sort of the pre-sale setup, or it might be that your solicitor may have ordered it on your behalf. And so then that Strata inspector goes and inspects the records. And I've read hundreds of them over the years, and they vary in degrees of usefulness, put it that way. I mean, some of them are like, I've had one that was 600 pages long because it literally was just cut and paste. It was just reproduced all these documents. They didn't read it or interpret them or put them into some context. They actually just, it's like a document vomit. And other times where they really do go in there and forensically read through the minutes and then go and find evidence, in the other documents to find out where they got quotes, whether they've done this, where they've done, to chase the trail bait. But in years gone by, I used to see more email correspondence in these reports than I do these days. And Amanda, it's one of those things that you talk about all the time. And I find that those pre-purchase reports, they just don't have it. And I think it's obviously time and money. And the only way you're really going to get access to it is to go and do it yourself, by the sounds of it.
Yes. And here we are at my first step to successful Strata records inspection. It's actually making the request to go and inspect the records. And I'm glad you've started at that point of the usual process these days is that you're either presented with a report from the agent, and I want everybody to just be aware that that is the vendor's report. The person who is selling you the property has had a records inspection report prepared, and they are giving you that information. They have a vested interest in the content of that report.
Absolutely.
And a vendor who wants to sell or wants to get the price that they're happy with is going to shape that report in a way that suits them. Let's just be upfront about that. So
Absolutely.
If you are being
good point.
given...
And in some states, you don't get given that report.
Yes, you're right. If you're being given it or you're being told to pay you $50 for it, or it's over here on a website, download it, immediately, I think antennas need to go up, and purchasers should be saying to themselves, okay, thank you, that's nice, but this is just scratching the surface of what I should be having access to. Now, if you are the owner of a Strata apartment, you have a right to request a records inspection. What you can also do is authorize anybody else to go and inspect the records. So what I do if I'm acting for a purchaser who wants me to go and inspect records, or I want to go and inspect records, I get a letter from the owner of the apartment that says you are authorized to go and inspect the records. Now, if this vendor wants to sell and wants to get the best price possible, they shouldn't be hesitating to give you that authorization to go and inspect the records. You should get it from the agent or you should get it from the vendor. If they do hesitate, alarm bells again, guys. Yeah. So our law, at least in New South Wales, says that authorised representatives of owners can go and inspect records. Now, I'm saying go and inspect. That's because if the building is managed by a strata manager, that's the person who holds the books and records. That's part of their job, to be the custodian of the records. The front page of the contract will usually tell you who the strata manager is, if there is one, what their contact details are, and obviously you have the contact details for the vendor to get that authorization. You contact the strata manager and you make an appointment to inspect the records. These days, I'm finding, thank goodness, that most strata managers can facilitate records inspections online. So they actually have a portal where you can log into their system and you can access the file that they hold for the building, which is great. Makes it easy for you. You can do it from your desk. Some perhaps a little bit more old-fashioned strata management companies still have those hard copy records, or they can't facilitate that online access. So you actually
sit
go
there and go through each page and work out what's relevant. Yeah.
Yes. So if you're having to do that, set aside a couple of hours to do that. So that's really my first step: how to make the request to inspect the records, and making sure you understand you have a right to make that request and a right to go and inspect the records before you sign the contract.
And do it early.
It might be do it early, but it might be a little bit different depending on your state. So in Queensland, often a contract is formed with a condition that is subject to body corporate record search. So in that case, you actually take the contract to the body corporate managers, which gives you the right to inspect the records. So it depends what type of process you're going through.
Although if you're going to auction in Brisbane, Megan, you're not going to do it that way around, are you?
No, you do it before.
Yep. Yes, same in New South Wales. And this, to me, demonstrates the importance of getting your advice on your purchase from somebody who understands strata and community title. So Veronica and I have talked about this before. The cheapest conveyancer in town does not necessarily understand how owners, corporations and body corporates work. And there may be people listening to this podcast saying, oh my gosh, my conveyancer hasn't even mentioned books and records to me. I had no idea. I always say there's a difference between property lawyers and strata lawyers. There's definitely a difference between conveyancers and property lawyers. Everybody makes their own choice as to where they get their advice, but I do think it's really important, if you're buying strata, that you have specialist advice from somebody who understands strata, again, as early as possible, so they can help you with this process.
Another piece of gold there.
Absolutely.
Everybody. Yeah.
Now, not all, I just want to clarify something, because not all conveyances are cut price conveyances. Some conveyances are amazing. In fact, one that we use quite regularly with our clients is someone that you referred to us, Amanda. So, but not all lawyers know anything about strata either. So it's not an assumption that just because they're a conveyancer, they don't know, and just because someone's a lawyer, they do know. The lawyer has to be in New South Wales, an accredited property specialist for starters. That's what we would encourage you to look at. And within that, someone who actually does a lot of stratas. They can buy a lot of houses. They can help you buy a lot of houses, but do they understand all the things that Amanda is talking about?
And there's also nothing wrong with having your conveyancer who's going to do the transactional work, who's actually going to settle the purchase for you, and bringing in a specialist like a strata lawyer to do that front end records inspection and give you that advice prior to signing the contract. That's something I do quite regularly. And I have some very savvy property investor clients who know lots and lots about property, but we've become acquainted because they've purchased or looked at purchasing strata, and they've gone, ding, 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 I need to make sure I've got a specialist right up front who understands how this crazy, and it is crazy, world of strata works.
This fourth layer of government.
This fourth layer. That is right. That is very, very true.
So step two.
Step two is understanding what should be there when you go to inspect records, and understanding that you can ask for documents that may not be there. So an owner's corporation has an obligation to provide to you for inspection every document that is under its custody or control. Everything. And this is where we're going to get to emails, which Veronica was talking about earlier. So I've already mentioned minutes. That's kind of the obvious. You sit down at the strata manager's office, you get plonked with the minute books. You say, okay, that's great. I want to see every document that you hold, strata manager, in relation to this building. That means financial records. Okay, we want to see how much money is in the bank. We want to see the budget for the coming year. We want to see quotes and invoices. What has this building been spending money on the last 12 months? What is it proposed to spend money on moving forward? We want to see the 10-year forecast. And most states of Australia have a law that a strata or a community title building must have a 10-year plan, so we can see what the levies are going to look like over the next 10 years and what major capital work is going to be carried out. And this is my number one item that I ask for, because very often it's not there until I ask for it. I want to see all the email correspondence. So these are emails owners are sending to the strata manager, committee members are sending to the strata manager is sending out. And if you read the last 12 months of emails as best you can, and in some big buildings, that is thousands and thousands of emails, you start to get a picture of how the building is running. And you get this understanding of the harmony or disharmony within the building and what the key issues are. And I can almost guarantee that you will not be given the emails unless you ask for them.
Oh, good tip. Great tip.
I pretty much guarantee it from all the reports I've seen. As I said, I haven't seen an email and a report for a long time.
That's interesting, isn't it? Amanda, I want to pick up on a point that you made there and just dig in a little bit deeper. You talked about looking for the forecast for expenditure for the capital works, both in the next 12 months and also the next 10 years. I think one of the things that people ask for is, what is the balance of the sinking fund or the capital works fund, depending on what state you're in? But they don't necessarily know why they're asking that question. So can you talk us through those two things actually go hand in hand, but people may not know why those two things together are so important. So we've got a balance of a capital works fund. We've got a forecast of what expenditure is coming up. What do we need to do? What do we need to be looking at with those two items of information? Why is it important?
Yes. Many people will look at the financial records of the building and see that, for example, there's $200,000 in the capital works fund. That's fantastic. People say that sounds good. Lots of money. There's not going to be any surprises here. There won't be any special levies, we call them, to have to contribute funds, because this is a really healthy, financially healthy building. If you then look at the capital works fund plan, it will actually tell you what the balance of the fund should be in any particular year. So there might be 200,000 in the sinking fund this year. Let's say it's 2021. The capital works fund plan says this building should have 500,000 in the fund, because at this point in time, it is estimated that the lift will need to be replaced. It's 30 years old. It needs to be replaced. Also, bad timing. At the same time, we have to replace the roof membrane, and that's another $50,000 to replace the roof membrane. So we're getting into a building, maybe the building's 30 or 40 years old, and everything's kind of coming up at once that needs replacement. So we have a plan that's told us we should have this much in the fund by this date. We're thinking 200,000 looks great, but it doesn't really when we have this recommendation as to these really expensive capital works items that are coming up. It is not mandatory for a building to follow its capital works fund to the letter. And that's concerning, I think, for purchasers, because you don't know necessarily whether a building does have enough in its fund. Once again, reading the emails, looking at any reports that are on file from experts like waterproofing contractors or plumbers or others that have come in and given advice. Understanding what is coming up is going to help you make an informed decision about your purchase, because if there is this forecast expenditure and doesn't look like there's enough in the fund, you do need to be prepared for special levies that may be coming up. The other way that buildings manage this is to borrow money and get what we call a strata loan, which you then have to contribute towards repaying. So it might not be a deal breaker, but you need to understand if you're going to have these additional financial obligations coming up.
If you're a first home buyer and you've done your budget up and know how much you're spending on your mortgage and how much you've got to spend on your levies, and suddenly there's a massive special levy that everybody else knew about, but you hadn't done your research and you didn't know it was coming up, it's really hard for some people to find that extra money at a time after they've just settled a new purchase. You know, it may come up in the coming months that there's $20,000 or $30,000 special levy that you've got to find the funds for. You just can't turn around and say no.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it happen. I've heard it happen so many times. You know, I didn't know, and it's like it was quite easy to work out. The other thing too, some buildings do have a history of that's how they raise money. So they sort of vote to keep their levies low and the Capital Works Fund or the Sinking Fund contribution low, which means, and then just raise a special levy whenever they've got a thing that needs to be addressed. And so, and I look to that and I think, oh God, I don't like that, because they have not invested in that building. And this owner, and it is lumpy too. Yeah. How do you budget for that? But this owner has benefited from that pretty lax and tight ass sort of approach to managing the building.
Yes.
And you're going to suffer, you know, anything that's been left unattended, you're going to wear the consequences for, because you're buying in and there's not enough money there, and you're going to have to cough it up. And so you haven't had the benefit of using the building for all these years and owning the building for all these years and getting that capital growth supposedly that's in there, you know. So these are really important things. Yeah. Anything else that should be there, Amanda, in the records?
Insurance documents. It is the law right across the country that these buildings have to have a particular type of insurance. You have building insurance. Some buildings also have what we call office bearers liability insurance. So that protects the committee members. If they're making some dodgy decisions, then you want to make sure that there is insurance there. And in terms of building insurance, there are obligations to get the building valued by a registered valuer regularly. In New South Wales, that's every 3 years. And I've definitely had the experience very recently, actually, a couple of weeks ago, I attended an AGM, quite a prestigious building. I was a proxy holder for my client, and they questioned the valuation of the building. It was a $25 million valuation, I think, and these were 10 luxury, very, very high-end apartments. And it wasn't until on the instructions of my client, I pointed out, that valuation looks a little bit low, that the other owners looked at it and thought, yes, I think we better go and get a second opinion. You'd hate for the place to burn down and to be underinsured. So checking that there's insurance there, that it's valid, and that there is a valuation report that seems to back that up is another good thing to look for.
There's some areas of compliance as well in Strata that obviously, in some cases, you don't have to worry about it in a house, right? So, like if you've got a pool, if you're in a house, you need to have a certificate different certificates in different jurisdictions. Let's face it, but for safety in apartments in particular, you've got things like balustrade height. You've got window openings, because you don't want to be able to fit a baby's head through a window. This sounds really dreadful, but it's all about safety and stopping people falling out, basically. Yeah. You've also got cladding, you know, so flammable cladding. You've got asbestos. So you've got a work cover. There's a whole bunch of other, or fire safety certificate, annual fire safety statement. So you've got all these other levels of compliance that, you know, you want to be seeing in a building. Can you give us some insights into what you would look for in that regard?
Definitely all of those things. I heard from a strata manager just this week. He was saying it's now, if he had $1 for every time he's being asked by banks, I think it's banks asking for cladding reports. You guys, I'm not sure if you guys see this on your site. Yeah. and just confirmation that a building doesn't have cladding, or that if they do have cladding, that it's non-flammable cladding, or that there is a process underway to be dealing with that. We're hearing in Sydney that there have been buildings that have spent millions of dollars having to replace their facades, and we don't have government assistance for that. So I'm really glad you raised cladding. That's an important one. Look, we can go down the rabbit hole of brand new buildings and talk about building defects. That's a huge, huge flashing light that should be there for purchasers.
Episode in itself.
And really, I used to say, you know, buying anything less than 10 years old always made me a little bit nervous. But, you know, since Mascot Towers, we're nervous even for our older buildings. And our new legislation that our building commissioner has been championing, it doesn't cover those older buildings. If there are original building defects that just have never been addressed, owners are left with the bill for those. So it's just another thing to have on your list, your checklist, if you like, when you go looking at records. If the building is, let's say, within 20 years old, you might be having a close look at whether there are still original building defects and communications about that.
I'm going to pop some links in the show notes here for some of the Elephant in the Room podcasts that refer to these topics, because particularly Mascot Towers was 12 years old when it started sinking into the ground. So that was alarming, because until that point, the publicity in New South Wales around sort of major building defects had been on buildings that were relatively new and still within their, the statutory period, whereas that one clearly outside, which means that the entire liability fell on the shoulders of the owners within that building. And there's also, then I interviewed just a council certifier, right, just to understand, who'd been in the game for 40 years, to understand the history. And that's when I sort of thought about that's when I was flagged about the 20-year thing. It's like, this isn't necessarily just a new building. So I'll put some of those links in the show notes, because these are you do need to understand, the risks associated with buildings. There are ways to look for history to try to give yourself some comfort, but there are risks with this. So anyway.
And with our older buildings, it's really that cycle of repair and maintenance, seeing that is happening. And we spoke about it earlier. You can tell from the documents, from the communications, if you've got an engaged committee that's thinking about these things, that has a regular maintenance program, that's got cleaners on site. You want to make sure that you're the way it's presented on your open for inspection is actually the way it's going to be when you're living there. And another tragic building, Miami, and the collapse that we saw there, that was a 40-year-old building, and it's come out since that collapse that this was a failure to repair and maintain, and that there were reports, there were signs, there were emails from the chairperson of that homeowners association, as they call it over there, saying this is too risky. I'm resigning from this committee because no one is paying attention to this problem. And it was a pool that was leaking water penetration to the car park, just horrific. And when you look back over that 2 years before that tragic event, that this community knew about that. And apartments would have been buying and selling in that time. New owners, very hot property market over there, and people just don't inspect the records, don't understand what they're getting into.
There's an email I would have wanted to read. I wanted to read that guy's resignation letter, and then it might have been a massive big red flag not to buy in that building. Wow.
All right, Amanda, so we've talked through your first two steps. Let's go through the next two steps.
So the third step is to understand some of the common misconceptions when it comes to records inspections. And this is something that I have over my 17 years of practice, I can call common, because they come up regularly when I go to inspect records. And that is strata managers, often it is, they are the custodian of the records, telling you that they can't provide certain documents, usually the emails, because they are private and confidential. So this comes up regularly, and some people who are inspecting just accept that and say, oh, okay, well, I understand. I don't want to breach anybody's privacy. What I want to make clear today is that there is no privacy in Strata records. If you are an
There
owner,
you go. You heard it here first.
if you are an owner or an owner's authorised representative, you can see every document that is under the custody or control of the owner's corporation. That includes one document we haven't mentioned yet, the Strata roll. And the Strata roll is that document that lists the name and contact details of every owner in the building. It's probably not something that as a purchaser coming in, you necessarily need to see or are really thinking about, but it comes up a lot with clients that I work with where they are wanting to understand how many owner occupiers do we have. They want a campaign to get their project approved at the next AGM. So they want to send an email to all owners encouraging them to vote for their proposal. That is absolutely legal. They are entitled to access the contact details of every owner. And together with emails, this is the other document that I'm regularly told by strata managers, no, you cannot have it because it is private and confidential. Legally, that does not fly. And we have cases in our tribunal in New South Wales, definitely, that backs that up and says there is no privacy law. The national privacy principles don't apply to strata records. There is no reason why an owner or their representative should not be able to access those kinds of records.
Okay.
Is there any exception to the rule?
There is no exception to the rule in relation to privacy. The only overlaying factor being that if you are not an owner or you're not an authorised representative of an owner, then you shouldn't be looking at records. You have no legal entitlement to look at records. The other misconception is around documents that may be the subject of legal professional privilege. So where an owner's corporation has a lawyer acting for them in relation to litigation, they're either suing an owner or an owner's suing them, or they're getting some advice about a third party, then the communication that flows between the lawyer and the owner's corporation is privileged and should not be released to third parties. There is a complicating factor here, however. You heard me say earlier that every owner is a member of the owner's corporation, right? So the owner's corporation is this legal entity, but it's made up of every owner. So when you think about who the lawyer's client is, the lawyer's client is every owner in the building. So this is why I call this another misconception. When an owner goes to inspect records, often a strata manager will withhold any legal advice that the owner's corporation has and say, oh, that's privileged, you can't see it. The owner is entitled to see that most times, and I'll tell you the exception. Most times the owner is entitled to see that because they're a member of the owner's corporation. They're actually contributing to the lawyer's fees through their levies. The lawyer is representing them as a member of the owner's corporation. The only time those documents are privileged is when it is actually the owner themselves who is in litigation with the owner's corporation. So they are the opposing party. If the owner of Lot 6 has damaged the common property and the owner's corporation is suing them in the tribunal, then the advice that the owner's corporation has about Lot 6's actions is privileged, and Lot 6 can't see that advice. So the strata manager can take that out of the records if Lot 6 is inspecting the records. If Lot 3 is going to inspect the records, Lot 3 can read that advice. It's not their dispute with the owner's corporation. They're actually a member of the owner's corporation. They're entitled to see that advice. So it's not privileged if Lot 3 is inspecting the records. It's only privileged if Lot 6 is inspecting the records. But what you find, again, 9 times out of 10, the strata manager just takes the easy route and just removes all legal correspondence from the file and says it's privileged, you can't see it. And this is a problem for purchasers because it's possible that you're going to inspect records and you've listened to this podcast and you've heard Amanda say, make sure you understand what's going on in the building. There might be litigation going on and there's expenses associated with that. You've got to be aware. And you might look at the records and there's nothing there about lawyers or legal proceedings. That could be because the strata manager has removed all that, thinking it's privileged when really it's not. You're the purchaser. You're not even an owner. Of course it's not privileged. You're entitled to see that. So that's a good one to be asking about. Is there any litigation? Is there any legal advice that I should be seeing that should be part of these records?
goes back to one of our principles, and that is, you need to engage with people who know what they're doing, because in most cases you don't know what you don't know. And, I've learned things just listening to you today. We don't buy a lot of apartments in Brisbane. Most of what we buy is freehold homes. But I'm sort of walking away going, geez, I wouldn't want to be the one who's doing the inspection of these records without the knowledge that someone like you has from the amount of times that you've looked at records and know what to look at and how to dig in and what the indicating factors are. And there's just such a lot of information to wade through there. But then to even follow up on, you might find something, but then what do you do with that information? You need to take it another step further and find out more about it sometimes.
Yep, definitely.
Right, okay, so that's 4. Step 3. Where are we now?
Yes, well, step 4. Step 4 is a little bit different depending on whether you are an owner already in a building or whether you are a purchaser, still not having signed that contract yet. If you go to inspect the records and what you expect to see is not there, or you have asked for particular records and you continue to be told incorrectly that they don't need to be provided, or that they're private, or that they're privileged, if you are an owner, you can seek redress for that. You can go to the tribunal and you can seek an order forcing the owners corporation to deliver up particular records. Mm-hmm. And I always say, before you do that, make sure you're very clear about what it is that you want to see and what you believe is missing. That means sending a letter, listing the documents that you want, and giving the owners corporation through their strata manager the opportunity to deliver up those documents. But if all that fails, you can go to the tribunal and seek an order forcing the owners corporation to act. I suppose step 4, from the perspective of a purchaser who hasn't yet signed a contract, going to look at these records and either seeing things in there that make you a little bit uncomfortable. Those alarm bells are going. There's an expenditure coming up and there doesn't seem to be money in the kitty. I think then taking that information and conferring with your advisor about how best to use that information. It might not mean walking away from the purchase. It might mean that your knowledge actually makes you quite powerful in the process of negotiating your purchase. And this is something that I've been able to do in the past because I have this knowledge, is to go back to a vendor and say, hey, I've looked at the records. I can see all of this coming up for this building. You want X for this property. I'm going to have to keep 50 grand in my bank account because this is coming up. So I'm going to pay you Y. Take it or leave it, buddy. If you have that knowledge, then you're able to negotiate a lot more confidently and competently, perhaps, than if you didn't have it. And that is the power in a records inspection. That's really step 4. How do you use that information to your advantage?
So you can walk away if you discovered information that basically, now that you know it, you don't actually want to buy into that big problem. Or you can look at it in a commercial sense to say, well, it's quite contained in terms of it's quantifiable. You can actually look at the problem and say, you know what, I've realized that there's going to be a liability that I'm buying into, but, I'm able to offset that in the negotiations. And sometimes, certainly in a hot market, we come across things like that all the time, and it might be walk away purely because it's a hot market and other buyers haven't done all of this research, and so they don't know. And you got to have confidence to walk away from things. Just because somebody who doesn't know is prepared to pay a crazy price doesn't mean you should, now that you do know, pay a crazy price. So this is a great process to protect you. And look, Amanda, this has been such an interesting interview, and thank you so much for stepping that process through for us and also our listeners. We've got a final question for you.
Amanda, absolute joy. I've learnt things today. I'm always learning things off Veronica in this strata space because it's not something I do a lot of purchasing in. But what's one thing that you can leave our listeners with?
A final word.
Yes, happy to give a final word. I speak a lot about my experiences as a strata lawyer, and I want to be very clear that because of that position, I am seeing the top 2% of the 5% worst case scenarios. And I want to make sure that we don't leave your listeners today feeling scared about investing in strata. If you're looking to purchase a strata or community title property, continue that search. Just do it armed with the knowledge that you've learned here today and understanding that there are things that you don't know. And all of this today has been conveyed with the intention of helping you make a better purchasing decision. As I said, I live in strata, invest in strata. I love living in an apartment community, having my neighbours close by, working together to improve the building and improve the value of our investment can be a fantastic investment decision. Living in an urban environment, having the ease that comes with apartment living, all of that good stuff. Let's not forget that. And this little bit of knowledge and knowing where to go to get more information about apartment living, I think just gets you on the right track. So let's end hopefully on that positive note.
Oh, that's great. Advice. And I think fundamentally so that you can avoid being the 2% of the 5%. The 5%, yeah. we want you to be the majority that actually do get to enjoy strata living as opposed to the trap. You're falling in those traps that are easily avoidable if you follow the right process. Thank you so much, Amanda.
My pleasure. Thank you, Veronica and Megan.
During our 3-year journey to help first home buyers, we have found an increasing number of you want us to help you guide them on your rent vesting journey. So, due to popular demand, we are bringing you the very first Where to Buy workshop Investor Edition.
We are indeed, and this is very exciting for us. I tell you, this is the culmination of over 40 years experience that we're going to teach you step by step, not where you should buy, but...
No, this is not the answer. This is not the golden bullet.
Not the silver bullet. It is, we're going to teach you how to properly research this vast, wild country of ours to be able to work out where you should look to investigate to buy your investment property. It's a really, really important skill that you learn how to critically look at data, information, what the important things are, and we're going to teach you how to do it. When are we going to do it?
We're doing it on the, Veronica, I don't have that in front of me.
Well, that's okay. I'll step in because we're a team. And we are going to do the Where to Buy Workshop Investor Edition on Wednesday, the 24th of November, 2021, 7 till 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So that's basically Sydney, Melbourne time. 6 till 8 if you're in
Brisbane.
And I can't remember if you're in Adelaide and elsewhere, but basically
about half an hour behind. Yeah.
Live to you on Wednesday, 24th of November, we are bringing you the Where to Buy workshop. So if you want to tune in, the link is in the show notes.
In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first-time buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.